feedback.
I'm sorry, I forgot.
I'm willing to continue. Yes,
It's all right.
I say yes. Anyway, it's that difference of those who stay more or less alone as opposed to those who by habit are interactive. Is that?
Yeah. Well, no, that it's an insight to realize you can't answer the question, so you better ask somebody.
Yeah, yeah.
You're understanding. You're understanding this is a question I can't answer. I don't have the data, or whatever. And
Or
somebody-
I think it's this, I need some confirmation or correction, right?
Right, exactly. And so the way our mind works is that asking and answering questions is kind of an inner conversation. And this inner conversation, what am I doing when I really understand? What am I doing when I really listen, like you did to that woman who called you? Those two basic things are, when you really listen, it's clear that you have to receive what they're really saying. You have to comprehend it. And that's a kind of conscious act. And for you, since it's a practical issue, you realized part of your listening was already implicit in your listening to her is, what am I going to do? How am I going to
Yes,
help?
yes.
And that willingness to help her is really the analogy for the Holy Spirit.
And if I may, I have to think Tom Welbers has so many thousands of interactions as a parish priest in
Yeah.
that same regard.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
it's clear that
that's what's going through my mind too. And
he has insights all the time.
and you know, I for better or for worse, I do have something of a reputation for being a good listener. And a part of it, I think, is, you know, in processing what I am hearing, I want to respond on the other person's turf, as it will. As
Yeah,
it will.
that's the only intelligent thing to do.
Yeah, rather than patiently waiting so I can get my 2 cents worth in.
Yeah, so.
We've known a few of those, haven't we?
Yeah. Or
Okay,
impatiently.
will they stop so I could start, you know?
Yeah, precisely.
Okay, then another aspect, once you get a possibly relevant answer because you understood it and you can say what you understood, then you have the question of, is this possible answer actually true? And that's a question for reflective understanding. And what that wants to know is the evidence sufficient to make a judgment that it's true or only probable or only possible?
Uh-huh.
And so our lawyers in the room did that all the time with regard to the problems that they encountered. And so that's the further question, the reflective understanding. And then there's the other question about when you actually have alternative courses of action, which you could take, and you have to deliberate and evaluate what's the best course of action.
And prioritize.
Exactly. And how do you prioritize? Everybody, the way Aristotle talks about it is, everybody has a notion of what the good life is. And he uses this umbrella term, that for the sake of which you decide and do everything. So all you guys are committed clearly to a higher end, the highest end. You're committed to a Christian life, oriented to the Father like Jesus was oriented to the Father. And it's on account of the power of the Holy Spirit that you're oriented that way. So you evaluate in the light of, you just deliberate and evaluate about the right course of action in the light of the highest end, that for the sake of which you decide and do everything.
Mhm.
And that leads to a judgment of value. This is what I should do. This is the right course of action. Now, on all these levels, you could be mistaken.
Hello.
Just as you're very aware that you might. Like when Ned jumped in after you mentioned the mental health thing, he wanted to emphasize that's not just a good idea, it's an idea you should follow. See? Because he's familiar with the turf and he understands
Uh-huh.
the problem. And so we need help that way, because knowing is a self-correcting process. And so many times you have a hunch in relation to something, and you find out that your hunch was really a mistake, and you correct the mistake. See? And so you see how this depends on the kind of person you are. What you said about Tom and what Tom was able to say about himself, of being a good listener and wanting to answer the actual question that the person is talking about or the issue they're discussing, that's because of the kind of person it's existential. He's a good person. So that's another aspect, both for judgments of fact, is my possibly relevant understanding actually relevant, and questions of value.
Why, Fred, is it?
Let me say this one thing. It's a nice sentence that La Rochefoucauld, one of the French person who writes aphorism, said, people complain about their memory, but they never complain about their judgment. And it's because they're responsible for their judgment. They're not responsible if they forgot something, but they're responsible for their judgment, whether it's a judgment of fact or a judgment of value. And the reason we're meeting together is because of the kind of people we are. Why it's such a joy every week to meet with people like you, which in a sense, they're kind of few on the ground. They're more than I know, but they're few on the ground in a certain way, because of just the kind of people you spoke of. They wouldn't ask somebody else. In fact, they're not asking the question. They're not alive to it. So think of all these very poor kids whose parents, both of whose parents work full time, and they're stuck with watching TV all day. And they go to school with a very small vocabulary, whereas kids who have parents talking to them all the time, they have a ton of words. And the possibility of the kid who doesn't have those catching up, they really have a big problem for the rest of their life catching up. So and so that thing, what I'm emphasizing there is how important the social interaction, that first stage of learning how to talk and learning how to say things. It's an amazing thing when parents can really talk to their kids. And so I'm sorry for going on so long.
No, but I appreciate what you said, and I just want to throw it off to Tom Welbers for a second, because my experience is that much of what the other party tends to share up front is not the real issue, and that listening and questioning in a non-judgmental way often gets below, what would you call that, the appearance and into the core, Tom?
Yeah, there's something that I learned, and I think I only learned it upon retirement. I wish I had really known it before.
Always a day short. What is he? Always a day.
Day
A
late.
day late and a dollar
Day
short.
short, a dollar
Yeah,
too
yeah.
few.
If I really want to tell somebody something,
Mhm.
the surest way not to do that is to tell it to them. To me, the surest way to do it is to ask the kind of question that maybe will provoke them to think in the lines of what the answer seems to be. And my experience has been, more often than not, that method of questioning tends to get a better answer from them than I was going to give them.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
I-
becomes a learning experience for me too.
I think from what you've said, Tom and John, about turf, that you really cannot have a very effective interchange that yields as much truth as possible without knowing how to be and to be generous. Generosity, I think, is sort of the matrix within which effective, good conversations and learning happen. And without it, to the extent that it's not there, you really can't get much.
Yeah.
And the more generous one is, the more effective, because the connection becomes more intimate and more disclosing and more trusting.
Yes.
What you just said, I really appreciate, because I'm convinced that that quote generosity is not just financial, is not just material. It starts with just space and time and welcoming that begins the trust pattern, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's existential. You're constituting yourself in the conversation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
Go ahead.
that's why I already love both the lawyers here, because what they had to do was listen to people's problems. People had problems that they couldn't solve, but you had a whole set of knowledge of prior, having asked prior questions and so forth during your education and through your experience, to recontextualize their problems and come up with possible courses of action. And it's no good if you don't really hear what the person's problem really is. Like what Tom was saying, a person may think their problem is this, but their real problem is something else.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
And Ned, you had on one part of your legal profession, very high level corporate practice. And then you moved to what you've done for the last, 15 years or so with the work you did with Catholic Charities. But there are certain skills that you kind of honed, would you say, in the earlier years?
Yeah, I'm hearing back what I'm saying in a very gruff way. How do I sound to you guys? Do I sound like a human being?
You're fine now.
Yeah,
We
It's
I don't know
just-
what that was, but
human being is distinguished from what?
Well, I mean, like this. When I come
Oh.
feedback coming back like that. Anyway, very early on in law school, and because my dad was who he was, I feared, because of the dynamic in the classes of law school, there were sort of very, very bright people in our classes. And they were very used to being paid attention to and to high achievement levels. And they were also very ambitious. And they were very much willing to argue to win and to use the law as effectively as they could, sometimes skirting the edge of, I think, propriety. And don't ask me to explain that unless I have time to really think about it. And I became concerned about the practice of law, the appropriate practice of law. And I wound up, my wife and I wound up connected with a prayer group. I had a friend who I trusted very, very much, an Immaculate Heart nun, who was a microbiologist. She'd gotten her PhD after many, many years of slogging because of financial things and time commitments. But I really respected her. And through her, quotes John, mentoring and the prayer that we entered into, and Darla and I were connected with this prayer group for years and years. It began to seem, well, I got convinced that listening was an exercise in generosity, and that prayer was an exercise in humility, which was very connected with generosity. And that seeped into law and my practice of it in such a way that for my entire career with the law, even though the first 5 years of my being a lawyer was litigation, the most that I did as a lawyer was negotiate and get into, I was always sent to situations that were, I thought I was going to get fired at some point because I couldn't possibly work things out. But doing what Tom just mentioned to us, trying to understand, just listening and listening and listening and trying to understand the context that you were in, the environment, the intellectual, emotional environment that you were in, and the facts that were there. You asked a whole bunch of questions, and it didn't hurt that I was representing this huge, you know, what do they call it?
Monolith.
Corporation.
Yeah, corporation, but I mean the 500 and 200, the something 200, you know, so it was a very, in terms of money, respected thing. So here I am representing this huge thing, this monolith that's got all this money. And if I'm there talking, they're going to listen. because it's in their interest to listen, but they're also hearing somebody who's listening. And so anyway, story short, most of my time in the law, I spent solving things, getting into situations that were difficult and listening and negotiating. And I just kept getting promoted and promoted because it seemed that the overwhelming style of most of the guys was confrontational and to see who could amass the best facts using the law to not convince but overwhelm. And
Well, but that's the adversary system.
I understand, but I got where I got by not doing that and by listening and bringing people together. And I also think that in the years that I was practicing, I was a bit unusual. I mean, this was a very white, and God knows I do not believe in all this garbage that's going on right now that we could talk about later. You know, the woke thing and the white supremacy and all that crap. You know, I was a Mexican. Well, they didn't expect a Mexican to be walking in, representing this company, and a smart one who didn't confront, but brought people together and asked a lot of questions and tried to solve things where we could get as much as possible a win-win-win-win kind of situation. And
I'm going to jump in for a second. Forgive me. I got a phone call. I got a phone call yesterday from my daughter, Krista, and she was on vacation with family. And on the airplane coming home, she saw for the first time 2 episodes of the TV show Bull, B-U-L-L.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with it at all?
I am.
And she fell in love with it because in her perception, this guy is high ethics and curious, investigative, and team oriented. I don't know what, George, maybe you want to observe.
Well, he's basically a very high level jury consultant, right? Isn't he?
Yes.
And has a stable of psychologists and so forth that take the, you know, life situation of jurors and from that predict what arguments arguably will be successful. There was a famous case in federal court here. I know the lawyers who did it, where this guy burnt a yacht, destroyed it, to arson for insurance money. And so these were the attorneys for the insurance companies. And they had a jury consultant kind of guy who studied the judge, the federal judge, and said, look, this guy's a preppy of the preppies. Just wear a blue blazer and tan slacks to court and you'll win. And they did, you know. Now, that's kind of a cartoon version, right? But it cracks me up every time I think of it. I think it's a good show. I mean, Betty watches it religiously.
Yeah, Darlene introduced me to it, and she said, "Yeah, this is good."
Well,
Yeah.
well, when someone said that the people you were contrasting yourself with were adversarial, the word advocate came into my mind, and it reminded me then of John 16. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go, the advocate will not come to you. But if I go, he will send him to you. The Holy Spirit. That's what you talked about in terms of generosity, really was also love
Yes.
plus practical wisdom. And I think, God, that's so exemplary and wonderful what you did.
I'm sorry, but the thing that was going through my mind, Fred, as you were referring to that, is you could paraphrase Jesus by saying, I gotta leave, but don't worry, I'm sending my lawyer.
Well, what if it's one
Well,
of
and
those,
he's going to be your lawyer now, you know.
Yeah.
I have a sort of parenthetical question. Ned and I were talking about this yesterday. There is somewhere in the New Testament a passage or several passages where, to state it colloquially, the message is everything you would want to know or would need to know about God, you know, if in Jesus. You know, Jesus is the perfect exemplar and imago Dei. And if you've got a grasp on Jesus, you don't have to sweat it about the rest of about God the Father. And Ned and I were feverishly looking for that yesterday, and all I could come up with was John 10, verse 30. I and the Father are one. You know, that's kind of a clue. But could you guys think of a passage that just
Or
sort
he
of,
who sees me sees the Father.
Pardon?
He who sees me sees the Father. I think that was his answer to Philip.
Yeah, Philip, exactly.
Philip,
Philip, I've been with you so long.
this is a post-resurrection exchange, right? But I just thought it was more explicit that, you know, hey, you got me, you got the Father. Don't trouble your pretty little heads. You don't need to know any more than that. And maybe that's some sermon I heard or something. Maybe it's not something Jesus said or Paul said. You know, the super explicit version. I mean, if you say I and the Father are one, then okay, that's so if you know either of them, you know the other.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Geometrical proposition, two things equal to a third thing or something. No, one thing equal, whatever.
but also in
I'll go back to Chalcedon.
way of John's prologue, where it says where the word of God is said to be close to the heart of the Father.
Mhm.
That's another passage.
Yeah.
I am the way, the truth, and the life. My meat is to do the will of the Father,
mhm.
etc., etc. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing you picked up from that sermon.
Yeah,
Maybe we have more of those.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. It's funny because I've had, and I know we're getting up, but I've had almost a congenital resistance to the Gospel of John for much of my, virtually all of my life until like within the last year. And all my resistance to it is just collapsing because you know, I've always been put off by sort of what I've seen as Gnostic half expressions or, you know, tendencies or something, but it doesn't, I think I was mistaken about that. You know, the Last Supper discourse is just amazing. And so I'm no longer fighting John. It was
Cardinal,
me and the synoptics versus that Gnostic guy, John.
Cardinal Martini, we used to talk about the school of the word, said that Mark is for beginners
Mm,
and Matthew's for growing up, big long discourses. Luke is for people who are going out on missions. And when you finally get there, which is where you got, John is for your type of guy,
ah,
your stage
well,
of life. I think there you illustrated that in such a wonderful way.
well, Herbert, I meant to tell you this last week. Herbert was a great fan of Martini's. Martini came to Los Gatos and gave the California province a retreat. I guess it would have been in the, I don't know, in the 90s or the early 00s. And Herbert was just so taken with him. And I don't know if he knew him or just knew of him.
He became part of the Lonergan conspiracy.
Uh-huh.
And we found that out when he gave the, I forgot the name of the lecture, a title lecture at Harvard. And after dinner, one of the people, after his talk, one of the people who were going to go to the dinner with him said he couldn't go. So he said, why don't you and Sue take my place? So we did. And before he started discoursing after supper, he said, let's go around and say what we're doing, what in our lives and so forth. And he said, well, let's start with Fred Lawrence. So I told him what I was doing, and I thought he deliberately did that. And I found out that he did later on, because he was very close to Lonergan. I think I might have told you that he was the rector of the Biblicum in Rome.
Mhm.
And he used to put on his, what they call Bagorozzi clothes and go help an old man, which was something that the community of St. Egidio was trying to do, take care of the anziani. And he would give Bible studies to people in all the different areas where they worked. And when Pope John Paul called him to be the next Bishop of Milan, he said he would do that. But I will only do it if you give me 3 months to prepare. And he told me that during the 3 months, he read Method in Theology, and that shaped his whole action as the ordinary of Milan.
Wow.
And
Wow.
and then he was instrumental in having Comunione e Liberazione, their publishing house, publish Italian translations of Lonergan's works. And I told him one time about the idea of, this was early in that project, that they were going to translate Lonergan's Latin works into English, and they would put the Latin at the back of the book. And he said, no, you have to put it on the opposite page,
Mm.
is the way they did it.
Mm.
So we had a meeting, of a Lonergan workshop meeting, and he came to give in Rome, and he came to give the introductory lecture in Italian. It was called a Probusione, but it was a wonderful wonderful occasion. And he was really, in my feeling, just a wonderful person because he was so steeped in the scriptures. He used to fill the largest community of kids, teenagers, uh, with to hear his sermons on the scripture. And I remember he told me one time, I decided to give a letter to all the people who came to give to their friends to invite them to come too, and so forth. So he just was, and I remember one of his comments was, I just went to a meeting of bishops in Germany, and all they wanted to talk about was competence, meaning legal. What's your jurisdiction, so to speak, legal, it's canon law bit. And he said, I couldn't get over, because all I want to know is, what should I do?
Mhm.
So it was very nice. He's very down to earth. He was very down to earth and very holy, I think.
Ignatius Press, I guess, doesn't publish him as much as it does others, right? For some strange reason.
Yeah, for some strange reason.
Yeah. I just looking him up on Wikipedia and Amazon. The guy had movie star good looks. I mean, right? I mean, he was a very handsome guy. That always helps, you know, what the heck.
I'm afraid it helps too much.
Yeah.
Oh, it's lovely. Lovely. But you take what God gives you and run with it.
He's got a lot of books here.
Oh, yes. He was prolific. His meditations are wonderful on the scriptures. They're not heavy duty and really wonderful for meditating with.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm seeing.
Here's a picture of Martini and Pope Benedict, and it says Cardinal Carlo Maria Martini, 85, dies. He held liberal views, says the New York Times.
Tisk, tisk.
Fred Lonergan, I say this with a lot more humility than it will sound like I'm saying it. I'm intrigued at what is so intriguing about the guy. You know, like Ned asked, is he sort of a, this isn't the way Ned put it, a glorified epistemologist? But so much of what you were talking about, Ned and Fred, about listening, truly listening to the other person, sounds like almost a course in lawyering skills, Ned, you know,
Yeah.
about how to hear your client and what the true concerns are. And, you know, Loyola Law Clinic for law students, you know, kind of.
Right.
Empathetic, or what do they call it, empathic listening.
Yeah.
Why? But then when I look at Lonergan on Wikipedia, he's writing some very heavy stuff about the church and Jesus and so forth. How does his listening stuff rise to the level of philosophy? And that's not combative on my part. I mean, I don't know.
I think the big influence on that Lonergan had on him was realizing that people tended to think of empirical, meaning that you can ask and answer questions about things that you perceive with your senses. And so Lonergan talked about generalized empirical method, which includes the data of consciousness. We are conscious, and we can thematize what's going on in our consciousness by focusing on it. And we do that. If you do the Ignatian discernment of spirits, that's what that's all about. And so I think that's what he mostly appreciated was Lonergan's. He did like his theology, but he also liked that this every time that he writes about the scriptures, he connects it with the spiritual exercises. That's one of the things that would have impressed them at Los Gatos. So I think that was the key. But he also, you know, he told us that he was at the Biblicum when Lonergan was there, and all the bright guys who came to the Biblicum from the Greg kept talking about Lonergan. So he said, I went to one of his lectures and I could understand nothing.
That's always been my reaction to the little I've heard.
But
I'm not Martini.
Yeah. There's an essay in another collection of essays by Lonergan called The Mediation of Christ in Prayer.
Okay.
And I can, whenever I get to BC, which I don't do very often, I'll try to remember to photocopy it and send it to you guys. It really is a wonderful thing. So isn't that, I mean, what a gift to that corporation that Ned worked for, to have a person who actually listened and slowly but surely figured out things based on what the real problems were as far as his clients could tell, which he got out of him by really showing that he cared. It wasn't just generosity, it was charity, it was love. It's just that was a wonderful account. And so we see Tom doing it in his priesthood, and
Yeah, really.
and John appreciating that because he knows he's been listened to by Tom and so forth.
Yep.
So that's the analogy for the Holy Spirit, that it proceeds from the Word. So the Trinitarian analogy is based on what we're doing when we understand, when we really understand. What are we doing when we speak? And what are we doing when we listen? And that's the key. If you answer those questions in terms of your own interiority, you have a knowledge of the processions and also of God as an infinite act of loving understanding. So
I just flashed on Francis. Before he came to the United States, he had these TV, they were broadcast on TV, interviews with various American Catholics. And one of them was a nun who works on the border in Texas.
yeah.
And she was introducing her flock to Francis. This lady's a maid, blah, blah, blah. And watching Francis listen was does anybody remember that?
I
It's
never-
just
Sorry, not I.
the way he would do it. And I can't really describe it, but he was, he's sitting there and is white and he's the Pope, but it wasn't merely putting the people at ease. It was, he was encountering them and listening to them.
And caring.
Yeah, and yeah, I can't describe it. But Fred, do you remember that at all?
No, I never saw it, but I don't doubt the fact of what you described. I'm sure that's the case from everything I know about him. So he, interestingly enough, one of the Argentine Lonerganians was named Scanone. And he was a good friend of Francis, fellow Jesuits down there. And Francis asked him to please come and be his advisor for his first year of the papacy, which he did. Oddly enough, Scanone came to BC because we have quite a large Hispanic faculty in our School of Theology and Education. And so he partly came to see them, but he made a point to look up Sue and me. And he told me that he did his theology in Innsbruck, where Ronner was. And they put out a journal, a learned journal. And he got into Lonergan because they asked him to review the book Insight for that journal. And he got hooked from that time on. But so the importance of listening cannot be overestimated because it's so close to what love is all about. But I want to go back to something Ned said about all this foolishness. You're reminding me of something I was already reminded of before we met. That I read a book years ago by a great German emigre who really lived most of his life in Austria and taught in the University of Vienna Law School. But he became a noted political scientist here in the States. And during those early years, when Hitler arose, he wrote a book on race. And he said, there's no genetic basis for the difference between races. All human beings share practically everything, no matter what their skin color or nationality and so forth. So there is a sense in which a shoe dropped for me that racism really is an ideology. Not that there isn't discrimination, not that there isn't the inequities that are worried about, but to do it under the heading of race is really missing the point. And the point really is, and this isn't ideological, it's class, not race.
Where's Brian Drolet when we need it? But anyway, go ahead.
Oh, no, please, but I've missed Brian. We were also pals when I was
I think we all do.
Yeah.
Is he alive still?
Yes.
He is, and he, through his sister, has said he'll be in California sometime soon for a family birthday. But I'm still trying to stir that pot.
I remember he would write home to his family from the seminary And he started by leaving off the zip code. And then he left off the city. And then he left off the address. And they kept getting his mail. Those were the old days. Anyway, thanks for recalling Brian. So where is he now?
Cleveland, John? I'm not sure.
Midwest somewhere, I think he went from Chicago to New York, and I think now somewhere in the Midwest.
And what's he actually doing?
Hoping to find out. Sorry,
Oh, it's okay.
only got a response that he would soon be in California, and anything else I sent him, he just ignored it. So I plan never to take offense. I'll just be happy whatever I get back.
Right, right.
I'll have to call him. He and I were very close for many years, and sort of lost touch. Plus, I, to my shame, I think, got fed up with his Marxism, which ultimately struck me as naive. And for a long time, I was a fellow traveler of his, truly. You know, I just finally decided it was an utterly murderous, you know, one could multiply adjectives, but just not even probable cause for communism as an alternative to anything. It seemed to me finally, after a number of years in which I thought that it was an alternative to our current order. But anyway.
What dissuaded you?
Dead bodies, murder,
Okay.
gulags.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Yeah, remember there was I remember the first no, in all seriousness, Fred, I stood shoulder to shoulder with him on you know, the stuff I did that nobody but he knows, you know, with him. And I remember reading about a publication called The Black Book. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
By a bunch of French intellectuals. This was probably published in what, the 80s or 90s. And they just started cataloging, huh?
Maybe even earlier.
Oh, really? And they just started cataloging the body count, country by country by country. And the amount of people, I mean, you know, like Hitler's totals, I consider Hitler more evil than anybody, but his body count wasn't anywhere near that of, say, Mao Zedong, nowhere near. And Stalin, Pol Pot, you know, it's, I don't know what it is, because I haven't.
Oh, that's a big deal.
Huh?
That's a big deal, but do you think Drolet is in sympathy with that?
Is it collateral damage, George?
Yes, thanks. I think that's what he would have thought, at least back then. No omelet without breaking eggs, you know. Who was it? George Orwell said, well, fine, but where's the omelet?
Yeah. But when I was in Germany, it was the time of student radicalism.
Baader Meinhof.
No, well, that was true. But you had people like one that stands out in my mind is Jürgen Habermas.
Yeah.
Who was in great sympathy with the student rebels, but he eventually called them left fascists. So you have it you have that coming in, but in general, in Germany, they distinguish between Marxism and what they call Die Macht, which was the communism of the Eastern Bloc and of China, which deals with people in an authoritarian and violent way, as they're doing with Navalny now and so forth. So when it comes to Marxism, on the one hand, you have book Marxists, people who read a lot about it and read Marx and sympathize with it. But on the other hand, you have active Marxists, maybe who aren't they're not involved with the evil thing that you're talking about. So maybe some of your instincts in sympathizing with it were correct.
Oh, sure. I mean, it's the other great faith of the 20th century, right? You know, I mean, Marx was the son of a line of rabbis, and his writing is often, I think, pretty prophetic. And yeah, I mean, a lot of ideals went into that, and great compassion even. But, you know, look at the Soviet Union. I mean, all those old Bolsheviks who were splendid people, many of them. Huh?
There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, but what happened to them circa 1938, you know, with Stalin?
Yeah, on my mother's side, my grandparents were they left the Ukraine in order to avoid being put into the Russian army. And there was just a tremendous slaughter under Khrushchev when he was in charge in the Ukraine of the Ukrainians. So I don't have any sympathy with that. And I always remember while I was in Rome, my mother would warn me, don't try to go to Ukraine. Don't try to go to Ukraine, which I wasn't overwhelmingly tempted to do.
That triggers in my mind a little question, Fred. Were her family from the Ukraine, were they Ukrainian or were they German?
Oh no, they were Ukrainian.
Yeah.
But my grandmother spoke
Yes.
Russian, Polish.
The reason I ask is my maternal grandparents came from Ukraine also, but they were German Russians, the ones who were imported by Catherine the Great, who was herself German, to kind of straighten out the country, I guess.
Did your family, Fred, remember the terror famine?
Yes. Yes.
They were there, huh?
No, they remembered it, but I don't think they were actually there. But there were old widowers who lived in the neighborhood where my grandmother lived. And she used to read, they were not literate. And she used to meet with them every week to read to them the Ukrainian newspaper.
Uh-huh.
So she kept abreast of things going on there. So
George, I'm going to interrupt for a second. Is my memory correct? Brian Drolet in our first 2 years was a very aggressive and great football player until he blew out his knee. And my perception was all of a sudden he became a voracious reader. And do you have insight into what happened there?
I think he was always a strong reader.
Was he?
Yeah. Yeah, and he was on our all-star team in his senior year of high school, the year we won.
I thought he got injured earlier than that.
No, he was in that game. He played a mighty role rushing. Shelburne was college's quarterback, right, Dad?
Yep.
And Brian gave him hell. He was a very good lineman in that game, you know. His family, did you know them, Fred?
No,
His,
he did not.
Big family.
yeah. Oh, they were almost a fantasy 1950s Roman Catholic family, you know, 9 kids.
The youngest being handicapped in some way.
Down syndrome.
Syndrome, yeah.
But it's an interesting story. The only two that I was close to the family. I mean, I did Bonnie Drolet's divorce, you know, et cetera. And the only 2 of the 9 that are practicing Catholics are Diane and Patrice. Oh, maybe what's her name is, Ned? I can't think of her name. She became a special ed teacher.
Mhm. Think of her name, yeah.
And Diane and Patrice's Catholicism is holy cards and, you know, Lady of Fatima on a bush and all this stuff. You know, pious, very, very syrupy, pious stuff. And the other ones are all long gone.
Well, George Crook, I am going to designate you as our ambassador to not miss Brian Drolet's visit to Southern California.
I'll
Please.
call it this weekend. I miss him. I feel very guilty the way I, in essence,
Good,
just
good. Build the guilt.
bullshit. Uh-huh.
Okay, you'll take action. That's good.
That reminds me of the story about David Tracy. Sebastian Moore was fed up with the Benedictines, and he came to the States and he got a job as a chaplain at Marquette. And after he got fed up with Marquette, he came to BC for 7 years. And he used to go to the AAR, the American Association of Religion. And so David Tracy met him one day and said the usual thing we always say, Sebastian, how are you? And then what academics always do is say, what are you working on? And Sebastian answered, guilt. And David Tracy said, God's greatest emotion.
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned.
Yeah, I wonder. If Fred, one volume that would tell us about Lonergan would be Insight by Lonergan himself.
Yes.
Yeah.
If you look at Mark Miller, who teaches at USF, he did his dissertation under me, and he wrote a wonderful introductory volume to Lonergan, much better than The Achievement of Bernard Lonergan. And I think it's a reasonable price. So it's Mark Miller, and I can't remember the exact title, but.
Yeah, Fred, there's another one that comes up when I look for on Amazon, and that's by Terry Tekipe.
Yeah.
You know him?
Yes. He was the year ahead of me.
Is that any good? An
Uh,
introductory guide to Insight.
people have been helped by it. I knew Terry very well, and I kind of thought he was on a tangent. So I prefer Mark's much more than that one. but people have been helped by it. I have
Uh-huh.
to say that.
Is Mark still at the University of San Francisco?
Yes. He's the chair of the theology department now.
Is that Mark Miller, The Quest for God and the Good Life?
Yes, that's it.
Lonergan's Theological Anthropology.
Yes.
How many hundreds of dollars is that?
There are 21 used copies for beginning at $7.09.
Oh, that's got our
One of us
attention.
gets that one.
What's the book now?
Yeah, I bought one yesterday for $5.95. I don't know. For Kindle, I don't know. Figured how bad can it be, right?
What's the title now?
It's The Quest for God and the Good Life.
Uh-huh.
Thanks for finding that, Tom.
Yeah, so it's running around $7 or so plus $4 delivery.
Well, here's one. Bernard Lonergan, Christianity's Response to a Secular Age.
There's 18 collections of Lonergan material.
But this is free. The one I just Audible audiobook 000 free with Audible trial.
Who is it?
Yeah,
by?
that's a
Oh, come on.
bait to subscribe to Audible.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that.
It's by a guy named Jesuit Gordon Rickson, University of Toronto.
Right. He wrote his dissertation under Matt Lamb on grace in Lonergan. His Latin works on grace. But
Well, I think we should all select a book, the same book, and then ask Fred to guide us through it over several weeks in his spare time. That way we don't have to pay tuition, you know?
well, I wouldn't charge tuition, that's for sure.
Or travel cross country, yeah.
Does anybody want to do that?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, the paperback.
Tom, put it in writing and send it on an email,
Okay,
please.
well, I
In
was
the
only
form of-
half listening to George actually because I was looking to see which was the best deal for ordering Quest for God.
Yep,
Good
yep.
luck.
Good.
So what book should we choose? And are you referring, George, to one of Lonergan's books, like Insight, that we all get that, and Fred take us through it, or one of the books?
Or a commentary, if Fred thinks that'd be better.
I think this would be a good introduction, Mark Miller.
Mark Miller?
Yeah.
Here's one. What is Lonergan up to in Insight? A primer by Zacchaeus Studies. I like the name. I'm a fan of Zacchaeus. He was short. Terry Tekippe, T-E-K-I-P-P-E.
Yeah. That's right. TKIP, he called himself.
Yeah,
From
that's what I
Louisiana.
mentioned earlier.
What are you recommending, Fred? To
Mark Miller.
Mark Miller. Okay.
Really
Quest for God.
more or less
Oh, forgot.
goes through Lonergan's whole career. Insight is limited to knowing. But Lonergan went on to values and much more on interiority and love and so forth. And Mark gets that.
The Quest for God and the Good Life. Is that the name of it?
Yeah.
Oh,
Now,
Okay. Well, you guys are game? I'm game. Drummer?
The answer is yes.
Ned, is this sort of like Judgment at
Wait a minute.
Nuremberg?
We haven't heard from Fred. We're all sitting here.
Well, I thought we did. I thought Fred said, yeah, sure.
Well, Fred, do you have the book?
It's at my office.
Okay,
I rarely go to.
so,
But if you read it and have questions, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to answer.
Okay.
okay.
Yeah,
He's a very clear writer.
Now, there's another thing, and the lawyers among us can perhaps give an opinion on this. I have sitting on my desk a very, very good book scanner. You may have seen some of the stuff that I put out earlier on it.
Yeah, I'm grateful for that.
I could order one of the used copies. There's a good used copy. Signs of wear on edges and corners, maybe a little limited writing or highlighting, but for about $11, I can get one of these, and then I can scan it, and for private distribution and study, I would think that that would be okay for fair use copyright.
I have no idea what the law is on that stuff.
me either.
Well, then ignorance is bliss, right?
I don't know.
Well, the poor author's entitled to the fruit of his labor.
But he's not going to get it from an Amazon used book.
Yeah.
He had
that's
gotten it
true.
when the book
That's-
was originally
That's
purchased.
the point, isn't it?
You are a clear thinker, Webbers.
Yeah,
for
no,
you.
yeah, very good.
So, shall we do that? And I'll give you a progress report on it.
Sure.
I say yes.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Can get a good
We'll
copy.
find a way to pay you a bonus.
Oh, all right. That sounds good. Okay, I am proceeding to checkout. And the total with tax and shipping is going to be $12.14. And it will arrive, scheduled to arrive between July 22nd and 27th. And I've just placed my order.
Uh-oh.
Okay, we've got plenty of other conversation pieces.
Alia yata sunt. Thomas placed his
Udique.
order.
Udi que donate.
Um,
So I'm going to jump in. Last time we visited, did I bring up Joe Hernandez?
Yes.
yes.
I got some additional feedback. His father-in-law was an usher with my dad. His mother-in-law sang in the choir with my mother at St. Dominic Savio Parish. They were married at that parish. What a delight to be back connected with him.
So nice.
So he says hello to everybody here.
Oh, good, thanks.
Part 2. Pope Francis cracked down Friday on the spread of the old Latin Mass, reversing one of Pope Benedict XVI's signature decisions in a major challenge to the traditionalist Catholics who immediately decried it as an attack on them and the ancient liturgy. This was just breaking today. Are you
I was gonna
aware
bring
of
that
or
up
sensitive
earlier.
to?
Tell me, is the Pope Catholic?
Better than I am, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I read the motu proprio. It's very short. And I didn't have a chance to read his accompanying letter. But I saw a good article about it. In fact, I can email that to you. It's in something called The Pillar. Are any of you familiar with it? It seems to be one of the more reasonable right-leaning news sources without trying to engage in all kinds of negative rhetoric towards those they disagree with. And it had a pretty good article on it, I think. What, to my mind, what the point that the Pope makes as the reason for doing this is that the expressed hope of John Paul II and Benedict that this would be
Promote
a source of
unity.
unity. Yeah, that has never been realized, has caused greater division. So in a sense, it's trying to beat a dead horse that is beginning to smell.
On the, well, and that has been adopted as an attack vehicle against Vatican II.
Yes,
Oh, that's such a sad thing. Those guys.
Yeah.
You know.
But it's all around us, Ned.
Oh, no,
It's
no, no.
all around us.
yeah.
No, and that's why I say it's so sad that this enmity to Vatican II. God help us.
Well, this is gonna be not well received by your brother-in-law, Ned. I mean, it's a direct attack by Francis, the way it reads anyway in the media.
Sure, it's an attack. I think it was characterized appropriately, you know, by Tom. But it will be perceived.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, it's an attack. It's a declaration of war on those idiots.
It's not. It's an attempt.
Yes, it is.
Coincidentally, there was an article in the Boston Globe this morning about BC requiring all of its students to come back vaccinated.
Whoa.
And there's a cohort of 8 very conservative Catholics belonging to some organization whose name I can't remember, who are saying how disgusted and horrified they are because long dead fetuses were used, something from the remains of them were used to, in the preliminary stages of figuring out the
Well, the bishops considered that and talked about the attenuation there, and approved it. But boy, that didn't satisfy them at all.
yeah, it said Pope Francis has asked everybody to be vaccinated.
Yeah.
The Cardinal Archbishop of Boston has asked everybody to be vaccinated. And BC, and it says in that article that BC is going to hold the line. So
Good.
they lose 6 students who will go to Steubenville.
They're transferring to Steubenville?
Maybe. I
He's
don't know.
kidding.
That was a joke. I didn't realize it. Steubenville, gee, who teaches there, Ned?
Not Brian Drolet.
No.
No. Brian Fred was, at least was, he was a serious revolutionary.
Yeah.
You know, and was working to bring it to pass. And you know, and he could certainly point with accuracy to the horrors of our system.
Didn't he get lost in one of the many heresies that, you know, are out there with respect to communism?
Well, he maintains that his outfit maintains the true faith, and the others are heresies.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, would Stalin and Lenin have approved of the current China social system, you know, which is really authoritarian capitalism?
That's what it is.
They sure wouldn't have. So I don't know.
Which
Very
uses,
seductive. It was a communism, like take the Spanish Civil War. It was a faith, you know, of sincere people.
who had a legitimate gripe.
Yes, yeah, very much so. And still do. You know, I mean, it's not like we've gone to the workers' paradise around the world. Although things are a lot better than they were, you know. There's less poverty now than there's ever been, supposedly.
According to who was it? Steven Pinker, I think.
Well, he's the everything's getting better every day
Yeah.
in every way guy. I
Yeah.
haven't read him.
That's all I know. I haven't read it either. I listened to a couple of interviews with him, but
Yeah,
nothing other than that.
he's very anti-Catholic, Steven Pinker.
Mhm.
So Fred, there you are in the shadow of Harvard, right? So did you go to a lot of presentations there? And
No,
you expect them to come to BC, right?
kid, it's on the other side of the Charles River.
Uh-huh.
And we kid that that's the widest river in the world.
Oh. The Eastern Seaboard's Grand Canyon.
That's the Hudson, right? Betty and I vacationed in Boston for several days in 1991, and I just loved it. I thought it was a really neat city.
What time of the
You
year?
Fall.
Well, that's probably the best time anywhere.
Oh, it was beautiful.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot attractive about it.
Yeah, you know, and I haunted all the Kennedy sites, you know, the Boston Latin School where Honey Fitz went, and the JFK's old congressional district.
My son,
So I'm glad you put it that way, George, and we've got a few minutes left. How about superimposing Catholic Joe Biden with Catholic John Kennedy?
Oh, let's not. Oh, boy.
Okay, you can veto.
Well-
I'll back off.
I'll tell you this, Kennedy said his prayers every night. He would get down on his knees and rush through it. Our Father, Hail Mary, and Glory be. Jacqueline said she thought it was very cute. And he never missed Sunday Mass. And he would go to confession. All those, you know, during his most sexually immoral years. Well, it was hard to grade them, but sort of a constant. But he said he thought it was great that the press would show up to take pictures of him coming out of Sunday Mass because he was happy. But when he'd go to confession and these priests would say, "Good evening, Mr. President, how are you?" He'd say, "This isn't fair. I mean, Catholics want to go to confession anonymously," and he found it very humiliating. So implying to me that he confessed his sins, you know? I don't know. It's a fascinating subject to me.
Well, the
Or-
other thing is he never had to deal with the question of legalized abortion.
Wouldn't have mattered. He was known to procure them.
Well, so is Trump, but well, speculated anyway.
Yeah.
He certainly paid enough for that sort of thing.
Yeah. Oh,
Oh.
what a pretty little girl behind you, Fred.
I
think, oh yeah, it's my granddaughter.
am fascinated by the practice of faith of Biden. I just think he's been through so much in his life, and maybe I'm biased, but I think he has earned my loyalty.
You know, John, in that connection, Tom sent us
let me introduce you to Isabel, my granddaughter.
Hello,
Hi.
Hi, sweetheart.
would you wave for us?
Well,
Hey, the-
don't get too excited,
you.
Isabel.
Wonderful. Thank you, Isabel.
Just think we've gotten through this whole period without mentioning Pat Zeman or a certain vicar general.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, okay, it's not. But I would like to ask while we still are online, because I sent an email about it. George, what do you know about Howard Lincoln?
Oh, about as much as you do after that article that you
Hmm.
said. He was a priest of great prominence in that diocese. Built a parish out in the middle of the desert that was very affluent, would have his own fundraisers and would attract people like Bernard Dolan and Theodore McCarrick as headliners. And they'd fly out to Indian Wells. I mean, this wasn't even Palm Springs. Betty and I heard several of his sermons, liked him a lot. Very good homilist. And we discussed this. He's in a great position because his successor, who's been in place for a year, is one of these married Anglican priests who came into the Catholic Church with his family. And so here's the outgoing Roman Rite priest who's going to have a family. So should the people even raise an eyebrow? The more it changes, the more it stays. I don't know.
Mhm.
For me, it raised the question whether seminarians should become bartenders on the way.
Yeah.
I'm-
Lincoln went to St. John's, which I didn't realize.
Yeah, in fact,
Camarillo. I rather like the guy.
Jack Stager was a spiritual director there during his time. So Stager was on the faculty when Lincoln was there.
What did he think of it?
Great guy.
Yeah, go figure. I mean, he's in a perfect position to burlesque the whole celibacy mandate, 75 years old, off into the sunset, falls in love, and is going to get married and leaves behind a married pastor.
Mhm.
It's pretty hard to get too outraged.
Well, and a relatively new bishop who, from the tone of his letter, doesn't seem to know exactly how to handle it.
Yeah, really.
I would agree.
Tough spot, yeah.
Which is why
I'm going to reach out to Charlie Era, who probably has some insights there.
Terry Halloran sure as hell would have.
I'd be interested to hear Ricky's insights.
Well, I have some view of him, which is, couldn't he have just stolen away quietly if he was going to do this?
Mhm. He definitely
And
chose not to.
and I'm glad this happened so that my successor has to carry it instead of me. He said that too.
Yeah.
So it is funny. Don't you guys think it's funny?
I
It
do.
is, and fun resource for stirring pots.
Yeah, I mean, because he's leaving behind exactly what he's now becoming, a married priest.
Yeah.
And what he's leaving behind is with the full approbation of the ordinary and the Universal Catholic Church and everything else.
And of course, he himself was married and divorced before.
Yeah,
So
it's hilarious.
it's very interesting. And on the other side of the spectrum is Father Altman.
Oh, God.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
That's that guy in Wisconsin.
Yeah. And who
We should introduce him to Jesus.
I think he's already been introduced to Jesus and doesn't like him very much.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
My brother-in-law, John, shares your view of Biden completely.
Ah,
Forged in fire as a Catholic, truly believes in the church and in Jesus and in the sacraments.
suffered major losses and kept his faith.
Yeah. And I think he's been a complete mensch to let jerk Hunter. You know, I think Hunter Biden would steal the gold out of his dad's
I'm
teeth.
afraid, yeah.
But there was a picture of Joe just before the election that was published in the Washington Post, and he was with Hunter, and I think Hunter was shirtless, and there was Joe, and he was kissing him on the side of his face. And it just so called to my mind the prodigal son parable. You know, I mean, what do you do when you have a son like that?
They're a very,
I hate to say on that happy note, but
Yeah.
here we are, George.
Yeah, I mean, Hunter Biden is just bad news.
I'm losing the kind of sense that you have, John, and that Ricky apparently has, because I think Biden is just
far as it goes.
somehow lost in this far left. Do you guys know? I'm sure you do. Do you guys know Andrew Sullivan?
Yeah,
Yeah, he's a gay guy who's married and says he's a practicing Catholic, devout Catholic, with just a few glitches. And he's written some good stuff about how, and he's a liberal and has always been a liberal, and believes that many believe he's one of the reasons that we got the Supreme Court to allow married.
yeah. Remember when we were discussing that? I got his essay from the New Republic that was epical. I mean, it really influenced the whole debate.
He was the editor at the New Republic. He's written a piece that says what is going on, what happened to Biden and the far progressive. I mean, he's been thrown out of the the New York magazine because of his views. They're too conservative. The woke thing that's going on, the critical race theory has morphed about 3 times to the point where it's I think ridiculous. And
Yeah, but critical race theory, I don't agree with most of it, but it's not frivolous.
no, it's not frivolous, but it's morphing and not in a good way.
The only time I ever hear the expression critical race theory or woke is in the writings of those who are opposing it. I don't hear either of those terms being promoted very much by the let's say those who are left of center. I usually hear the criticisms of the far right using those expressions.
Oh, the Republicans are running with it. I mean, that's their latest wedge issue.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry I interrupted, Ned.
Oh, that's okay. No worries. I can sit and talk about it next time.
Fred, do you run into this messianic leftism at BC?
No, they're very I think they're center left.
But there's still due process, and you could be a conservative and you wouldn't be drummed off the faculty or
Exactly.
good.
We've always had conservative. The political science department is very conservative.
Really?
I hate all these labels, really,
Yeah,
because when I talk to conservatives, I'm a liberal, but when I talk to liberals, I'm a conservative.
Well, speaks well for you.
Yeah.
You know. Tom, what's that code number again for the Catholic Herald? I lost it.
Come again?
The code number for getting past the paywall on the newspaper.
On some of them, well, it's outline.com. And when you type in outline.com, you go to its website, it just has a box.
Wait a second.
You go back to the page where the
Okay.
article with the paywall happens to be, and copy the link and paste it in there.
The HTTPS thing.
Yeah,
after outline.com, you paste it in.
pardon me?
After outline.com, then you.
No, in front.
Outline.com, you get the outline website.
Mhm.
That has a little box.
Oh,
Okay, you paste the articles link, the URL, into that box. And if you're lucky, it will be able to jump over the paywall and give you the article without advertising.
Oh, that's great.
So play around with it a bit.
it's got to be a crime, but anyway.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
And you know, one of these days, it will disappear simply for that reason, I'm sure.
Probably.
As long as it's going, what I have heard that website outline.com does is basically it's intended to enable you to produce an outline in a PDF file of an article that does not have all of the intrusive advertising. And you know, some of that
Okay.
advertising can be pretty intrusive.
Fred, I bought von Balthasar's book on prayer and I've only read 15 pages, but this strikes me as magnificent so far. Thank you.
It's very rich, I think. You're welcome.
Is that the aphorisms book?
No,
Oh, no,
It's just a book on prayer.
on prayer. Okay. Well, it's
So-
12:09.
Yes, it is.
Shall we call it a day?
I love you all, but it's time to go.
Yeah,
That's right.
we got to get back to real life.
Yeah.
Amen. Say a prayer for me.
We'll say it definitely. That's great.
Say a prayer for me. On the 21st, I'm going to have a pacemaker replacement.
Ah,
Ah,
okay.
So I have to survive that. I think I will.
Well, we'll be praying for you, Fred.
Thank you very much.
We'll
And
pray.
Tom, we've just been praying for you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I'll be going in for my, what is it today? The
16 today.
Yeah, I'll be going in for my 9th radiation treatment, number 9 out of 37.
9th already.
Yeah.
We're moving it along.
Yeah, and
Any adverse effects?
not so far, not
Oh.
so far.
Wonderful.
Brain, Tom.
I guess the beginning of that treatment, they are doing a broad, relatively low-powered treatment of the whole pelvic area. And then as it goes on, it will increasingly narrow down to the lymph nodes and to the prostate base, where they've identified the cancer in one lymph node. Then they assume that it will be in, other areas where it's not quite yet progressed to being identifiable. And
Makes
then they will-
perfect sense.
Pardon me?
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah. And then,
Wish they had done it for Bobby J. Bro.
yeah, that, I don't really know the whole story of his final progression, but this technology, it's called the Varian. I'll send you a link to it. It's a Varian True Beam, and I guess it's pretty widespread now among many, many cancer centers. But it's just an amazing machine that the doctors and the technicians can vary the
The
exposure
focus,
and
yeah,
the focus and all of those things. And every time I go, which is to me fascinating, they position you through a laser thing with those little dots on your skin. They position you into exactly the same spot on the table every time. And then they do a CAT scan, which on the same machine, a CAT scan that then tells them if there's been any variation in position. Like if I have a full bladder versus an empty bladder, everything is a little bit different. So it will identify stuff like that and enable them, that will then automatically target and move the target to where the point is. It just blows my mind, the accuracy of the.
yes, amazing.
So we'll see if it works.
Well,
We pray that it works.
We'll
Yeah,
see if it works. Yeah.
please kind of, you guys.
Fred, is your procedure on the 21st, did you say?
yes,
Okay,
thank you.
sure.
21st, that's next Wednesday.
Right.
Okay. We will do that.
Well, on that happy note, everybody.
So God bless you all, and I will prepare to press the button that pulls the plug.
Okay.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Thank
God bless
you.
you.